Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be reading some Hegel, The Phenomenology of Spirit, one of my favorite books. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to sense certainty. This is on page 94, and we're using the Miller edition. So let's go to page 94. So this is section A, right after the introduction, the very beginning of the actual book. So let's get reading. A, consciousness, sense certainty, or the this and the meaning, meinen. 90. The knowledge or knowing, which is at the start, or is immediately our object, cannot be anything else but immediate knowledge itself, a knowledge of the immediate, or of what simply is. Our approach to the object must also be immediate or receptive. We must alter nothing in the object as it presents itself. In apprehending it, we must refrain from trying to come first, or when we take a bit of this wealth, and by division, enter into it. Moreover, sense certainty appears to be the truest knowledge, for it has not as yet omitted anything from the object, but has the object before it in its perfect entirety. But in the event, this very certainty proves itself to be the most abstract and poorest truth. All that it says about what it knows is just that it is, and its truth contains nothing but the sheer being of the thing, Sache. Consciousness, for its part, is in this certainty only as pure I, or I am in it only as a pure this, and the object similarly only as a pure this. I, this particular I, am certain of this particular thing, not because I, qua consciousness and knowing it, have developed myself or thought about it in various ways, and also not because the thing of which I am certain, in virtue of a host of distinct qualities, would be in its own self a rich complex of connections or related in various ways to other things. Neither of these has anything to do with the truth of sense certainty. Here, neither I nor the thing has the significance of a complex processes of mediation. The I does not have the significance of a manifold imagining of thinking, nor does the thing signify something that has a host of qualities. On the contrary, the thing is, and it is, merely because it is. It is, this is the essential point for sense knowledge, and this pure being, or the simple immediacy, constitutes its truth. Similarly, certainty is a connection. It as a connection is an immediate pure connection. Consciousness is I, nothing more, a pure this. The singular consciousness knows a pure this, or the single item. 92. But when we look carefully at this pure being, and here we can feel Hegel is about to start critically assessing this view that he's just set up in the past two aphorisms. But when we look carefully at this pure being, which constitutes the essence of the certainty, and which this certainty pronounces to be its truth, we see that much more is involved. So we have this certainty, we think it's immediate, and we are certain of that. But Hegel is now going to show that much more is actually involved. An actual sense certainty is not merely this pure immediacy, but an instance of it. Now that is a really important sentence. An actual sense certainty is not merely this pure immediacy, but an instance of it. Among the countless differences cropping up here, we find in every case that the crucial one is that, in sense certainty, pure being at once slips up into what we have called the two thises. One this as I, the other this as object. So there's countless differences cropping up here. In every case, that the crucial one is that in sense certainty, pure being once splits up into what we have called two thises. So we have the sense certainty coming in, it's this here, I'm apprehending, not comprehending. What Hegel is saying implicit in this is this as I, and this as object. So there's an subject-object distinction in sense certainty. When we reflect on this difference, we find that neither one nor the other is only immediately present in sense certainty, but each is at the same time mediated. I have this certainty through something else, vis-a-vis the thing. And it, similarly, is in sense certainty through something else, vis-a-vis through the I. 93. It is not just we who make this distinction between essence and instance, between immediacy and mediation. On the contrary, we find it within sense certainty itself, and it is to be taken up in the form in which it is present there, not as we have just defined it. One of the terms is posited in sense certainty in the form of a simple, immediate being, or as the essence, the object. The other, however, is posited as what is unessential and mediated. Something which in sense certainty is not in itself, but through the mediation of another. The I, a knowing, which knows the object only because the object is, while the knowing may either be or not be, but the object is. It is what is true, or it is the essence. It is regardless of whether it is known or not, and it remains even if it is not known, whereas there is no knowledge of the object is not there. The question must therefore be considered whether in sense certainty itself the object is in fact the kind of essence that sense certainty proclaims to be. Whether this notion of it is the essence of it as essence corresponds to the way in which present in sense certainty. To this end, we have not to reflect on it and ponder what it might be in truth, but only to consider the way in which it is present in sense certainty. So here, from these four aphorisms that I've just read, we can see at the beginning Hegel tees up what sense certainty is, then shows us on 92, and this is a good marker. When we look carefully at this pure being, which constitutes the essence of certainty, which is thisness, and which this certainty pronounces to be its truth, we see that much more is involved. So when you're reading Hegel, it can be hard to figure out when Hegel is talking and when he's actually putting up a thesis that he's about to investigate. And when you're reading, you should look for these markers, because if you don't, it's hard enough. So then the question must therefore be considered whether in sense certainty itself the object is in fact the kind of essence that sense certainty proclaims to be. So there's certain key aspects here that Hegel is investigating, the essence of sense certainty, thisness. 95. It is then sense certainty itself that must be asked. What is the this? If we take the this in the twofold shape of its being as now, as here, the dialectic it has in it will receive a form as intelligible as the this itself. To the question, what is now? Let us answer, now is night. In order to test the truth of this sense certainty, a simple experiment would suffice. We write down its truth. The truth cannot lose anything by being written down any more than it can lose anything through our preserving of it. If now, this noon, we look again at the written truth, we shall have to say that it has become stale. So time has passed. If you write down this noon, and you come back in a few hours, it will no longer be noon. The now, 96, the now that is night is preserved, i.e. it is treated as what is professed to be, as something that is, but it proves itself to be, on the contrary, something that is not. The now does indeed preserve itself, but as something that is not, night. Equally, it preserves itself in the face of the day that it now is, as something that also is not day. In other words, as a negative in general. This self-preserving now is therefore not immediate, but mediated, for it is determined as a permanent and self-preserving now through the fact that something else, vis-a-vis day and night, is not. As so determined, it is still just as simply now as before, and in this simplicity, is indifferent to what happens in it. Just as little as night and day are its being, just as much also is day and night. It is not in the least affected by this, its other being. A simple thing of this kind, which is through negation, which is neither this nor that, and not this, and is with equal indifference, this as well as that. Such a thing we call a universal. So it is in fact the universal that is the true content of sense certainty. 97. It is as a universal too that we utter what the sensuous content is. What we say is this, i.e. the universal, this or it is, being in general. Of course, we do not envisage the universal this or being in general, but we utter the universal. In other words, we do not strictly say what in this sense certainty we mean to say, but language, as we see, is the more truthful in it. We ourselves directly refute what we mean to say, and since the universal is the true content of sense certainty and language expresses this true content alone, it is just not possible for us ever to say or express in words a sensuous being that we mean. 98. The same will be the case when the other form of this with here, for example, the tree, if I turn around, this truth has vanished and is converted into its opposite. No tree is here, but a house instead. Here itself does not vanish, on the contrary, it abides constant in the vanishing of the house, the tree, and is indifferently house or tree. Again, therefore, this shows itself to be mediated simplicity or universality. So we have the subject and object as above, and now Hegel is showing that we actually have a mediated simplicity or universality within the this. So this is actually not a simple this. It has universality from what we've read. It changes depending on the time of day you write it down. And there's also this I is me and this object as external to me. 99. Pure being remains, therefore, as the essence of this sense certainty, since sense certainty has demonstrated in its own self that the truth of its object is the universal. But this pure being is not an immediacy, but something to which negation and mediation are essential. Consequently, it is not what we mean by being, but is being defined as abstraction or as the pure universal, and our meaning, for which the true content of sense certainty is not the universal, is all that is left over in the face of this empty or indifferent now and here. 100. When we compare the relation in which knowing and the object first came on the scene with the relation in which they now stand in this result, we find that it is reversed. The object, which was supposed to be the essential element in sense certainty, is now the unessential element. The universal, which the object has come to be, is no longer what the object is supposed essentially to be for sense certainty. On the contrary, the certainty is now to be found in the opposite element, vis-a-vis in knowing, which previously was the unessential element. Its truth is in the object as my object, or in its being mine, einen. It is because I know it. Sense certainty, then, though indeed expelled from the object, is not yet thereby overcome, but only driven back into the I. We have now to see that what experience shows us about its reality in the I. So we have this sense, this object. When we compare the relation in which knowing and the object first came on the scene with the relation in which they now stand in this result, we find that it is reversed. The object, it was the object that was essential. But now it is my object. I know it. I become essential. Sense certainty, then, though indeed expelled from the object, is not thereby overcome. In knowing, which previously was an essential element, its truth is in the object as my object. Okay. 101. The force of its truth thus lies now in the I, in the immediacy of my seeing, hearing, and so on. The vanishing of the single now and here that we mean is prevented by the fact that I hold them fast. Now is day because I see it. Here is a tree for the same reason. But in this relationship, sense certainty experiences the same dialectic acting upon itself as in the previous one. I, this I, see the tree and assert that here is a tree. But another I sees the house and maintains that here is not a tree, but a house instead. Both truths have the same authentication vis-a-vis the immediacy of seeing and the certainty and assurance that both have about their knowing. But the one truth vanishes in the other. 102. What does not disappear in all this is the I as universal, whose seeing is neither a seeing of the tree nor of this house, but a simple seeing, which, though mediated by the negation of this house, is all the same simple and indifferent to whatever happens in it, to the house, the tree. The I is merely universal, like now, here, or this in general. I do indeed mean a single I, but I can no more say what I mean in the case of I than I can in the case of now and here. When I say this here, this now, or a single item, I am saying all this is here's now in single items. Similarly, when I say I, this singular I say in general all I's. Everyone is what I say, everyone is I, the singular I. When science is faced with the demand, as if it were an acid test, it could not pass, that it should deduce, construct, find a priori, or however it is put, something called this thing, or this one man, it is reasonable that the demand should say which this thing or which this particular man is meant. But it is impossible to say this. Sense certainty thus comes to know by experiencing that its essence is the object, is neither in the object. So here we go. Hegel has just said that the essence is in the I, and now sense certainty comes to know by experience that its essence neither in the object nor in the I, and that its immediacy is neither an immediacy of the one nor the other. For in both, what I mean is rather something unessential, and the object and the I are universals, in which that now and here and I which I mean do not have a continuing being or are not. Thus we reach the stage where we have to posit the whole of sense certainty itself as its essence, and no longer only one of its moments as happened in the two cases where first the object confronting the I and then the I were supposed to be its reality. Thus, it is only sense certainty as a whole which stands firm within itself as immediacy, and by so doing excludes from itself all the opposition which has hitherto obtained. 104. This pure immediacy, therefore, no longer has any concern with the otherness of the here, as a tree which passes over into a here, that is not a tree, or with the otherness of the now as day which changes into a now, that is night, or with another I for which something else is object. Its truth preserves itself as a relation that remains self-identical and which makes no distinction of what is essential and what is unessential between the I and the object, a relation therefore into which also no distinction whatever can penetrate. This I assert, then, the here as a tree, and do not turn around so that the here would become for me not a tree. Also, I make no notice of the fact that another I sees the here as not a tree, or that I myself at another time take the here as not tree. The now is not day. On the contrary, I am a pure act of intuiting. I, for my part, stick to the fact that the now is day, or that the here is a tree. Also, I do not compare here and now and themselves with one another, but stick firmly to one immediate relation. The now is day. 105. Since then, this certainty will no longer come forth to us when we direct its attention to a now that is night, or to an I to whom it is night. We will approach it and let ourselves point to the now that is asserted. We must let ourselves point to it, for the truth of this immediate relation is the truth of this I which confines itself to one now or one here. Were we to examine this truth afterwards, or stand at a distance from it, it would lose its significance entirely. For that would do away with the immediacy which is essential to it. We must therefore enter the same point of time or space, point them out to ourselves, make ourselves into the same singular I, which is the one who knows with certainty. Let us then see how that immediate is constituted that is pointed out to us. 106. The now is pointed to this now. Now it has already ceased to be in the act of pointing to it. The now that is another now that the one pointed to, and we see that the now is just this, to be no more just when it is. The now as it is pointed out to us is now that has been, and this is the truth. It has not the truth of being. Yet this much is true, that it has been. But what essentially has been, gewesen is in fact not an essence that is, kein Wesen. It is not, and it was with being that we were concerned. 107. In this pointing out, then, we see merely a movement which takes the following course. 1. I point out the now, and it is asserted to be the truth. I point it out, however, as something that has been, or as something that has been superseded. I set aside this first truth. I now assert as the second truth that it has been, that it is superseded. But what has been is not. I set aside the second truth, its having been, its supersession, and thereby negate the negation of the now, and thus return to the first assertion, that the now is. The now and the pointing out the now are thus so constituted that neither one nor the other is something immediate and simple, but a movement which contains various moments. This is posited, but it is rather another that is posited, or the this is superseded, and this otherness, or the setting aside of the first, is itself in turn set aside, and so has returned into the first. However, this first, thus reflected into itself, is not exactly the same as it was to begin with, vis-a-vis something immediate. On the contrary, it is something that is reflected into itself, or a simple entity which, in its otherness, remains what it is, a now which is an absolute plurality of nows. And this is the true, the genuine now. The now as simple day which contains within it many nows, hours, a now of this sort, an hour similarly as many minutes, and this now is likewise many nows, and so on. The pointing out of the now is thus itself the movement which expresses what the now is, in truth, vis-a-vis as a result of a plurality of nows, all taken together. And the pointing out is the experience of learning that now is a universal. The here pointed out, to which I hold fast, is similarly a this. Here, which, in fact, is not this here, but a before, behind, above, a below, a right, a left, above. The above is itself similarly this manifold otherness of above, below, etc. The here, which was supposed to have been pointed out, vanishes in otherness. But these likewise vanish. What is pointed out, held fast, and abides, is a negative. This, which is negative only when the heres are taken as they should be, but in being so taken, they supersede themselves. What abides is a simple complex of many heres. The here that is meant would be the point, but it is not. On the contrary, when it is pointed out as something that is, pointing out shows itself to be not an immediate knowing of the point, but a movement from the here that is meant through many heres into the universal here, which is a simple plurality of heres, just as the day is a simple plurality of nows. 109. It is clear that the dialectic of sense certainty is nothing else but the simple history of its movement, or of its experience, and sense certainty itself is nothing else but just this history. That is why the natural consciousness, too, is always reaching this result, learning from experience what is true in it, but equally it is always forgetting it and starting the movement all over again. It is therefore astonishing when, in the face of this experience, it is asserted as a universal experience, and put forward, too, as a philosophical proposition, even as the outcome of skepticism, that the reality of being of external things, taken as thises or sense objects, has absolute truth for consciousness. To make such an assertion is not to know what one is saying, to be unaware that one is saying the opposite of what one wants to say. Truth for consciousness of a this of sense is supposed to be a universal experience. But the very opposite is universal experience. Every consciousness itself supersedes such a truth. Here is a tree, or now is noon, and proclaims the opposite. Here is not a tree, but a house, and similarly, it immediately again supersedes the assertion which set aside the first, so far as it is also just such an assertion of sensuous this. And what consciousness will learn from experience in all sense certainty is, in truth, only what we have seen vis-a-vis this as a universal, the very opposite of what that assertion affirmed to be universal experience. With this appeal to universal experience, we may be permitted to anticipate how the case stands in the practical sphere. In this respect, we can tell those who assert the truth and certainty of the reality of sense objects that they should go back to the most elementary school of wisdom, the ancient Eleusinian mysteries of Circe and Bacchus. He's saying people should get drunk. And that they still have to learn the secret meaning of the eating of bread and the drinking of wine. For he who is initiated into these mysteries not only comes to doubt the being of sensuous things, but to despair of it. In part, he brings about the nothingness of such things himself in his dealings with them, and in part he sees them reduce themselves to nothingness. Even in the animals are not shut out from this wisdom, but on the contrary show themselves to be most profoundly initiated into it. For they do not just stand idly in front of sensuous things, as if these possessed intrinsic being, but despairing of their reality and completely assured of their nothingness, they fall to without ceremony and eat them up. And all nature, like the animals, celebrates these open mysteries which teach us the truth about sensuous things. So this is the last section. 110. But just as our previous remarks would suggest, those who put forward such an assertion also themselves say the direct opposite of what they mean. A phenomena which is perhaps best calculated to induce them to reflect on the nature of a phenomena which is perhaps best calculated to induce them to reflect on the nature of sense certainty. They speak of the existence of external objects, which can be more precisely defined as actual, absolutely singular, wholly personal individual things, each of them absolutely unlike anything else. This existence, they say, has absolute certainty and truth. They mean this bit of paper on which I am writing, or rather have written. This, but what they mean is not what they say. If they actually wanted to say this bit of paper, which they mean if they wanted to say it, then this is impossible, because the sensuous, this that is meant, cannot be reached by language, which belongs to consciousness, to that which is inherently universal. In the actual attempt to say it, it would therefore crumble away. Those who started to describe it would not be able to complete the description, but would be compelled to leave it to others, who would themselves finally have to admit to speaking about something which is not. They certainly mean, then, this bit of paper here, which is quite different from the bit mentioned above. But they say actual things, external or sensuous objects, absolutely singular entities, Wesen, and so on, i.e., they say of them only what is universal. Consequently, what is called the unutterable is nothing else than the untrue, the irrational, what is merely meant but is not actually expressed. If nothing more is said of something, then that is an actual thing, an external object. Its description is only the most abstract of generalities, and in fact expresses its sameness with everything rather than its distinctiveness. When I say a single thing, I am really saying what it is from a wholly universal point of view. For everything is a single thing, and likewise, this thing is anything you like. If we describe it more exactly as this bit of paper, then each and every bit of paper is this bit of paper, and I have only uttered the universal all the time. But if I want to help out language, which has the divine nature of directly reversing the meaning of what is said, of making it into something else, and thus not letting what is meant get into words at all by pointing out this bit of paper, experience teaches me the truth of sense certainty is in fact is. I point it out as a here, which is a here of other heres, or is in its own self a simple togetherness of many heres, i.e., it is a universal. I take it up then as it is truth, and instead of knowing something immediate, I take the truth of it or perceive it. The German for to perceive, wahrnehmen, which literally means to make truly so. What is interesting is now that is the last part of sense certainty. And the interesting thing is the role of the eye. And we're going to see this in perception, or the thing, and deception. But what we're going to do now is at the very end of the Phenomenology, there is a commentary written by Findlay, if I'm correct. Yeah, afterward by Findlay. And he's going to explain what we've just, in a succinct way, he's going to explain what we've just gone over. So what we need to do is find the aphorism 90 in the back of the book, which I'll find now. So here we go. And he gives an analysis of the whole book. So here we have sense certainty. The knowledge from which our phenomenological investigation starts is absolutely immediate knowledge, which is also knowledge of what immediately is, of what just is there. What just is there must simply be taken in, registered. We must not try to grasp it notionally or add anything to it. It lays before us. 91. This sort of knowledge appears to be inexhaustibly rich in content and also in extent. What it lays before us seems to be infinitely divisible and to stretch away infinitely in time and space. It also appears to be the truest knowledge we can possess, since it omits no detail of the object. But this kind of knowledge also shows itself up to the phenomenological observer as the poorest and most abstract possible. It merely acknowledges the being of the object. The consciousness which is aware of it is, to us, merely aware of what to us merely is there, is likewise denuded of content. It does no thinking work. It connects nothing with nothing. It simply registers. It is just I, this consciousness, this mediate content. So this is Hegel teeing it up as we've seen in 1991. So they correspond to what Hegel's written. And then we have a different trajectory now, 92. When scrutinized, however, sense consciousness reveals itself as less purely immediate than it at first seemed. It involves two typical factors: an indefinite registered content and an indefinite registering self. And these constitute a necessary form or structure. There is a registering self only because there is an immediate content to register. And there is a registered content only because there is a self to register it. We are dealing with a general pattern of experience, not merely with a singular fact of existence. A tendency to self-correction is inherent in consciousness, and this distinguishes its subjectivity from objectivity. 93. Not only does sense certainty embody this subject-object pattern, it also involves a claim, something gesetzt, posited, that one factor is more true and essential than the other. The object comes before it as the true, the essential, that which is there, whether there is knowledge or not. Knowledge, contrawise, is given as secondary, unessential. It presupposes, depends on, is mediated by the object which is truly immediate and does not presuppose or depend on it. Realism is thus not an imposed theory, but part and parcel of our elementary experiences. We are dealing with something whose deeper nature will come out as we examine it, but not exhaustively and finally given. So we're already in 93 in three aphorisms. In the first two, Hegel has outlined what sense certainty is. And in 93, we see that the this that supposedly is not a thinking this. As Finlay says here, consciousness which is aware of what to us merely is there is likewise denuded of content, does no thinking work, it connects nothing with nothing, it simply registers, actually has an implicit subject-object pattern. It involves a claim that one is more essential to the other. And there's more to come. So, sense certainty in 94. Sense certainty seems, however, to involve an inherent conflict. Its object as given in it does not match what that object is given out is being. This content is not introduced by a reflective observer, but is part and parcel of sense certainty itself. It is because sense certainty feels itself not to be the rich thing it on the surface claims to be, that it tries to make out, to perceive what it has before. The immediate this of sense certainty involves the two connected forms of the now and the here. If we try to pin the now down by giving it definitive content, that content is quite inconstant. What now obtains is night, but a little later what now obtains is not night, but noon. Since what is always changes its appearance, we never get it at all. We never get at it. It is a complete thing which underlies changing appearances. 96. The now of sense certainty reveals itself as inherently universal, i.e., it cannot be identified with any one definite state of things, though it can also indifferently be any one of such state or other. Another. Universals obey a different logic from their instances. Not only the characters of what is are universals, but its general form is itself universal. Concrete reality behind changing appearances. 97. The use of demonstrative words, there is a conflict between what we really say and what we mean to say, or meinen was was wir meinen. We mean to express what is ultimately individual, but this is expressible. All we succeed in expressing is what is universal. The demonstrative here behaves exactly like the demonstrative now, and always changes its application. It is therefore a case of pure universality. We cannot pin down the individual position qua individual, but only individuality in general. The universality of pure being, which has revealed itself as the essence of sense certainty, involves abstraction, but it is not as it seemed to be. Real abstraction from rich contents, but abstraction from the mere meaning or claim to have rich contents. Individuality, in Hegel's view, is a mere moment of living concrete universality. 100. Since the object of sense certainty is not the definite contentful thing it claims to be, the phenomenological emphasis shifts to the subject. My experience becomes the rich, colorful thing. What I mean is important because it stems from me. Meinen. Like Descartes, Hegel shifts to the individual subject as that of which we are certain. 101. But in the flux of experience, the me, which experiences all, has different successive contents to its experience and cannot therefore be identified with such contents. The me of the moment may mean to be definite in content, but it cannot express this definiteness. It is, in a sense, as such a plurality as a single me. 102. This me also stands essentially opposed to other me's and cannot say how this me differs from another. Each man is as an experiment, every man. Experient, every man. The individual as such cannot be understood or deduced. 103. We now move to a position where not the mere object nor the mere subject is the rich, contentful thing, but the whole structured subject-object situation. 104 to 107. The whole structured subject-object situation is as essentially fluctuating as the mere subject or object considered before. The wholly definite time situation we try to pin down at once becomes a matter of the past. The only present that can survive is a universal present, which remains what it is despite various variation of content, and which has subordinate presence within it. From the many nows which arise and pass away, we come to a now which always is, no matter how long a happening may be. This is, of course, the universal. The substantial, the permanent is the universal, not the particular. 108. The wholly definite here, the point cannot be seized. Every real here breaks up into heres, or points to heres beyond itself. But in all these heres, the universal here persists. We cannot get parts, but strictly speaking, only the whole of reality, and the whole of reality is a universal present in all its so-called parts. 109. Sense certainty never grasps definite particulars, but always deludes itself into thinking that it does. In the mysteries, bread and wine are consumed to show the nullity of the solid things of sense, and hungry animals reveal the same mystical wisdom. 110. Language, being divine and rational, frustrates the attempt of sense certainty to grasp absurd particulars. It only expresses universals. The truth of sense certainty is taking from true, i.e., perception. The dialectic is much influenced by arguments in Plato's Theaetetus, where the impossibility of reconciling knowledge with radical subject-object flux is maintained, and the unchanging universal ideas are shown to be necessary. Wittgenstein would regard Hegel's treatment as resting on a misunderstanding of demonstratives, which are unique linguistic instruments, and neither name nor describe. So what I've read today is the sense certainty section. Now, of course, you need to go over this, and I'll need to go over this again and again and again to understand it. But at least today we're getting the skeleton key from this. We're seeing, as we've seen at the end, the dialectical structure. We're going, this is sense certainty, but it's not what it claims to be. It has subject-object in it. It has a universal in it. It has certain claims to this now, here. But then, in a few moments, the this now, here is stale. So, I will continue with Hegel and other readings. That was very interesting in sense certainty. Have a great day.